It's a peace deal that took almost 40 years to reach.
So why is this so significant?
Normalization with a wealthy neighbor with whom it shares one of its longest borders would really open up a lot of opportunities economically, diplomatically for the country.
Today is Friday, March 14th, and this is The Issue on the Voice of America.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori London.
And I'm Scott Walterman. Armenia and Azerbaijan have been locked in conflict for almost 40 years. This week, they finalized the text of a peace agreement aimed at establishing formal relations.
The United States has been praising both countries for the historic peace treaty. In a statement, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, quote, "This is an opportunity for both countries to turn the page and move in line with President Trump's vision for a more peaceful world."
Joining us to talk more about the significance of this long-awaited agreement is Ben Dubow, Nonresident Senior Fellow with the Democratic Resilience Program at the Center for European Policy Analysis.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So it's interesting because, there's a lot of conflicts. There are a lot of conflicts happening in the world right now that we've been very focused on and people are hearing about, but we haven't really heard much recently until now about the situation with Armenia and Azerbaijan. And apparently, as far as my understanding is, Baku and Yerevan have been locked in this conflict over Azerbaijan's breakaway region of Nagorno-Karabakh for years. I guess if we could just sort of get you to just give us a little bit of a background on what has been happening for decades between the two and why.
Yeah, definitely. In the twilight of the Soviet era, as Gorbachev implemented reforms that devolved a lot of power to the individual republics, one of the unintended consequences was a huge spike in ethnic conflict and ethnic rivalry, and this was really punctuated by a series of massive pogroms against Armenians in Azerbaijan, what was then Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic, which led to a series of escalating pogroms and violence back and forth between the two sides that Moscow really struggled to put a lid on. As that kind of continued and the dissolution of the Soviet Union continued and Armenia and Azerbaijan gained independence, largely Armenian populated area of Azerbaijan called Nagorno-Karabakh became an area of major contention. War was fought in the early 90s between the two, and it became somewhat of a frozen conflict for the next 20 or 30 years with occasional flare-ups over the years. In 2020, there was a major conflict between the two sides, with Azerbaijan deploying one of the most effective and wide-scale usage of drones in warfare up until that time. Azerbaijan won fairly decisively. They took over large parts of what was then a majority Armenian part of Nagorno-Karabakh in the southern half of the breakaway region. That kind of remained the stasis for a while. Russia brokered a peace. They sent in peacekeepers, and that kind of held until 2022. That's when Russia invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine's stiff resistance to Russian aggression really challenged the sense in the former Soviet states that Russia was the ultimate arbiter of power. Azerbaijan began to test Russia's resolve to maintain the peace for its allies. Armenia and Russia at that point were in a treaty alliance, the CTSO, and Azerbaijan basically gave an ultimatum to Russia to evacuate their peacekeepers to see whether Russia would actually kind of, show any resolve. In that instance, Russia did not. They just kind of issued statements saying everybody should agree to the peace treaty, and Azerbaijan essentially kicked out the Russian peacekeepers, which, augured poorly for Armenia's future, or for Nagorno-Karabakh, especially's future. This culminated the next year in 2023 in a siege on Nagorno-Karabakh that Armenia was unable to break and Russia was unwilling to really do anything about, and ultimately led to the Azerbaijani conquest of Nagorno-Karabakh, which led to the flight and expulsion of about 100,000 Armenians. As a result, since then, peace negotiations have been underway, which have resulted in the treaty that we just saw signed or agreed to the other day.
So where are they now? It's not a 100% done deal, right? There's still a few things that have to happen.
Yeah. So one of the big sticking points. So for the Azerbaijani side, because it's a much more centralized authority under Aliyev, they're saying, they're getting most of the concessions, if not all the concessions in this agreement. It's basically set from their side. Pashinyan, the Armenian president, has agreed to a constitutional change because the Armenian constitution references Nagorno-Karabakh. That'll actually take a referendum with the Armenian electorate, and that's going to have a very hard time passing because even though Pashinyan in his current position can kind of make the practical case, kind of putting something that's a lot of ways of national humiliation up to the ballot is going to be a very difficult sell.
It sounds like you said, it wouldn't be a quick deal because of so many complications as far as any full-fledged peace agreement. There are a lot of, including unconditional recognition of each other's territorial integrity. What is the probability that changes could be made, in the next month or two? Is that even possible?
The next month or two, I imagine there will be some tweaks over that time. For Azerbaijan, there's not much pressure. There's not much hurry on their end. They're coming to this from a total position of power. They get, some kind of good graces from the EU and from the West generally if they agree to it. But that's really kind of the biggest carrot for Azerbaijan's side right now. For Armenia, it is going to be Pashinyan trying really hard to sell this to the Armenian people. If Azerbaijan was willing to drop the constitutional change element of it, which maybe they will if an election is scheduled and the polling is clear what the results will be. The foreign minister of Armenia said that his interpretation of the constitution does not make any claims on Nagorno-Karabakh. So, there's some potential for that part of it to shake out if Azerbaijan is willing to concede on that. But they don't necessarily have much incentive to concede on that.
So what are the benefits for the two side? What are the benefits for the two if they do sign?
Yeah, so for Armenia, normalization with a wealthy neighbor with whom it shares one of its longest borders would really open up a lot of opportunities economically, diplomatically for the country. On its other border is Turkey, with whom it also has very frayed relations and a closed border right now. Azerbaijan and Turkey are very close, so there are kind of whispers that if this were to happen, it could later lead to normalization of relations with Turkey, which would convert Armenia's status from being very isolated right now to having strong relations, economic interactions with all its neighbors. For Azerbaijan, it's a bit more symbolic. It's, the ultimate victory in a war that in a lot of ways has unified the nation since its birth in the early 90s, and really would cement Aliyev's legacy as the person who resolved this major issue in the Azeri national consciousness.
So is that your view of what led to this sudden breakthrough after all this time?
Yeah, so it really was gradual. It was early 2023 when Nagorno-Karabakh was or 2024, excuse me, Nagorno-Karabakh was fully conquered by Azerbaijan. And since then, there have been hostage exchanges. There have been exchanges of a few other small villages, formal border demarcation. So there have been a lot of kind of trust-building exercises over the course of the past year and a half or so, leading to this peace negotiation. But, since the beginning of 2024, kind of the writing was on the wall. Armenia couldn't do anything militarily. Russia was not going to come in to rescue them. So it was going to be some negotiation. And it's kind of been this full year plus of trust-building exercises and negotiations to lead to this.
Ben, thanks so much for the time.
That was Ben Dubow, non-resident senior fellow with the Democratic Resilience Program at the Center for European Policy Analysis.
You've been listening to The Issue from the Voice of America.
On behalf of Scott and myself and all of us here at VOA in Washington and around the world, thank you so much for joining us.
And you can get your news whenever you want it, 24/7, on our website, voanews.com.
In Washington, I'm Lori London.
And I'm Scott Walterman.
We'll talk to you soon.